So thank you everyone for being here tonight. Some of you may have seen a message earlier that Rachel won't be with us tonight, but I told her I would handle the notes, so don't worry about it. So thank you though for everybody being here. A fairly, I think, a decent agenda. It'll be fun, some interesting things to talk about and some good learning that I think we'll experience. So the first thing then is I sent out the October minutes that Rachel put together, and so we need to approve those April minutes. Did anyone have any questions for those?
No.
Can I get a motion to approve the October minutes?
I'll move to approve the October minutes.
Thank you. In a second.
I'll second.
Thank you very much. Okay, so then the next item on the agenda is for our counselor report. So Counselor Parker, if you've got some things to share, which you always do, so appreciate anything you have.
Well, we've been doing some remarkable work in the last couple of months. I hate to sound so surprised, but part of it is built upon years of preparation. But we've come up with an action plan for our city manager of items for the city to tackle one after the other. We're going to be able to set this up in a Gantt chart so we what's moving. I knew that would excite you. And when things get clogged up and when we have cross points. So it really sets us on a 5-year plan of what roads we're going to build first. The first answer is Walnut Street, to punch a hole out of the industrial lands to ventilate the truck traffic. So that's one thing. We also finally got across the finish line the master parks plan, which some of you may remember that when we hired Scott Archer, part of the reason for it was that he previously ran a park and recreation district that was bigger than the city of Canby. And he did exactly what we wanted. He came up with a 10-year plan of what projects start when, long-range projects that are going to take a while to get to, low-hanging fruit that we can get to. And the great thing about it is that this is his timetable. It's not the council saying, you know, can you get this done next year? And I think all of us on the council had that same feeling of saying, is it going to take that long? But realistically, it does take that long. So we've got the a strategic plan done. We've got the parks plan done. We held another meeting on our the two major planning efforts that we're going to have in the next 3 years, which is going to be the expansion of the urban growth boundary. We finally have some general numbers now to deal with. Canby's growth has slowed down. It's counterintuitive because you see more cars and trucks on the road, but Columbia Distributing alone generates 500,000 trips a year. The retired couple that lives in Timber Ridge, maybe 10 a day. So, maybe two. So we're using Portland State University's population estimates. They can be high or low, but they are estimating we're going to grow at about the same rate that we are right now. Every day in Canby, 2 people die, 1 person is born, and 1.5 people move here. And that's kind of a flat rate. I interestingly have some conservative colleagues on the city council who don't believe in social engineering with public policy. But if we don't, we're going to end up with a bunch of people whose hair color is mine. that if we want to see children playing on the swings and playing on the baseball fields, we're going to have to do some serious social engineering on being able to find ways to subsidize housing for families. I mean, everybody's been talking about how to get some multifamily and that sort of thing. The trick is how you have a house big enough for 5 people, 3 parents, 2 parents and 3 kids, that is still affordable. We've got some things, some of them immediately the council flinched on. One of them is, for example, to remove the off-street parking requirement. That is, if you build a house, you have to have a place on your property to park your car, so you don't have cars on the street. Well, that is an expense. We could swap that out and make those houses cheaper, but in return, our streets have more traffic on it. So these are the sort of trade-offs that the council's going to have to look at the next couple of years. We approved $180,000 to purchase body cameras for all of our police. Currently, all of our police cars have front-facing cameras. It's interesting, the arc of this over the last decade. When this first came up, police departments across the country really weren't excited about this. Now they are. They are tremendously excited of being able to do, if they have to go to court, of saying, here's what actually happened, instead of on somebody's iPhone or a recollection. The back end of that is very complex on storing, but we've got this new whiz-bang software that's supposed to do everything. But from years in working in the Oregon Audits Division, auditing IT programs, I've come up with 3 IT concepts. 1, it's never going to do what you think it is. 2, it's going to cost more than you think it is. And 3, you're going to have to replace it sooner than you think you will. So I've gotten over the hype of salesmen of saying this is going to change your life. Actually, they may be right in a weird way. What else do I need to tell you about? Body cameras. We're moving towards Microsoft Office. Yeah. Yes. Don't get me started. Yes, we're moving into the 20th century. So, but it's going to be a big improvement. And what it does is it provides us with a much more secure situation that if, for example, City Hall becomes incapacitated and we have to have distributed centers during an emergency, we're not reliant upon a server here. That to the extent that we have access to the internet and have access to the cloud, that we'll be able to run city government at from remote. So that's all I've got. Back.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Just for me quickly for planning, our last planning meeting was actually a joint session with the mayor and the city council to talk about many of the things that Councilor Parker is just talking about, to go over the housing and economic needs study, and a lot of those, you know, they're peeling the onion with more information. So that was a really great informative session. But I do want to share a quick story about a planning session here that happened, because I think particularly those with work with the city closely can relate. So there was a very wildly attended planning commission meeting here last week. 300 people attended. I hope that never happens in Canby, by the way. And it has to do with a road that's being punched through that'll affect the community I'm in, particularly in a good way. So it'll give us a 1-mile road that is much more of a direct connect to the real world, rather than having to take a 5-mile road through the desert kind of thing. However, it crosses a railroad track. And so this thing's been in the works for over a year and a half. It was supposed to be done by now with the road and signals that we've never had a signal here before. Big deal. Well, the railroad has, as you can imagine, slowed things down to a glacial crawl. And they won't allow our community to turn on the signaling for this new intersection until they complete a piece of their project. And they think they'll get it done next year. But everything else is done. The road's been pushed through, the signals are put in, they're just not operational. So someone was talking about, well, why do they get to just name their own project time? And why are they allowed to do that? And the mayor of the city here said, well, that railroad has been there for 175 years and we haven't. I thought, yep, that's the name of it, the way it works, isn't it? So lots of frustrated people here because of the railroad taking their time, but we know how that works. So stay tuned. We have a 1 mile road to nowhere, basically. Okay, that's it for me then. I guess then just to talk real quickly about our next meeting date, which is December 5th, which will be a combined public hearing and Heritage and Landmark Commission meeting to go through to put the Depot Museum, the Depot building on the Register of Historic Places. And so we'll do what we did last time. We'll have our meeting in advance of the public hearing, and I'll send some information about that. Likely, I think it'd probably be good to have our meeting just at our normal time, but keep it to 30 minutes and then have the public hearing on the hour. And I'll send some notes out to everybody. We do need a quorum for that meeting, but we haven't been having a problem with that lately. So just stay tuned for that, but make sure you mark that on your dates, on your calendar with pen, because that's a critical meeting. So anybody have questions about that?
I
December 5th.
want to mention that since the hearing part is a quasi judicial action reviewable by the city council, I'll do what I did last time, which is attend the business meeting and then excuse myself from the hearing part.
Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Then the next thing is, Tyler, thank you for passing that out. An item for discussion for us, and thank you, Carol and Councilor Parker, is the Parks and Rec group, the committee, has put together a draft policy for naming city parks. And I think that's a good thing. We probably want to take a few moments to go through it, I think. I did do some research. I think Carol probably did, and I know Peggy Siegler, who's a very important historian consultant in our area. She's done some research as well. My research, what I found is that it very much mimics what other cities are doing, the policy and the procedure and how it works. I looked specifically at cities that have a significant heritage or history component, like in Astoria or Albany or even Boston, to see if any of them had any specific requirements related to ensuring that the right people are looking into any historic naming convention. Is it named after somebody from history? Well, is that the right thing? And, for somebody who knows what they're doing, not me, but knows what they're doing, to, offer up some suggestions or, to take a look-see at what's being proposed. I could not find any other city that has that requirement. It's an interesting idea to run it by us or run it by the Canby Historical Society. My guess is that would probably happen anyway. If somebody had something that was historic, somebody, informally would say, hey, let's, run this by a few people. But honestly, as it stands, the one that's been drafted, I think, is almost identical to the other cities that I looked at. I think it's okay as is. They have a nice procedure written on, in a form on how to nominate a park for a name or how to rename, which has come up a lot, interestingly, in some cemetery discussions I've been in. And you might think, well, why does somebody rename a park? And to me, the most recent in the last, I'd say 5 years or so, has been where something was a little bit politically sensitive or history sensitive. So they renamed something to be more politically correct in today's world. But that's really the only thing I can think of. Maybe they find out something about the background of a person and they change the name of the school or something. You see that coming up now and then. That's the only reason I can think of. But it's good to have that covered, so people think about, well, how does it work? Not only to name something new, but to change the name. I thought the policy did a good job of suggesting about, if you want to name a component of a park or, a section or a tree or something like that, that there's really a bit of a different process, and they encourage people to do it a certain way. But as far as I could see, it was very comprehensive. So do we want to take a moment to talk through it, or how would you like to offer up your opinions?
Judy, I have a question. So on the criteria,
Yeah,
as a criteria, point number 3, conditions of property donation as agreed on by the donor and the city shall be honored regarding the naming of parks, recreation facilities, and so on.
Yeah.
What's the intention on that? Is that like if a donor wants the name to be a certain thing that has to be honored? Am I reading that correctly? Or it was a little murky, the language there. Do you know what that is?
no, but the way I interpreted that, and maybe there's another section, is that if you want to name it after a person, then you have to have something in writing that that person okays that it's named after them.
Okay.
If they're alive,
I would assume so, because they're looking for written permission.
Is it a name or is it just what the donor let me rephrase this. When the donor donates the land as a condition of that being donated, they say, I want it to be named this. And the city agrees to that, does that circumvent everything else? Like, if they want to name it something, I don't know, insensitive, and it's 20 acres of prime property that we need, is there a way to mitigate that, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I didn't read anything about that in there. That is a good question.
I kind of read, yeah, so that was the only one where I was like, well, what is that?
Yeah.
Mean? So,
And I don't remember seeing that in other cities either, but you have to think it comes up.
yeah,
but it says it has to be an agreement agreed upon by the donor and the city, so the city can cut it off. I mean, we don't have to accept what the donor said, that's the way I'm reading.
yeah, that's what I asked, I wasn't really sure.
But it might be good to get the clarification of that from the Parks and Rec board.
Okay, that sounds great. Anybody else? Those are great questions, comments.
Me is a.
Okay, well then, I appreciate the opportunity that we've been given to take a look-see at this and have a little bit of a weigh in. More sets of eyes are always a good thing. So I will send that information on to the Parks and Rec group. And thank you, everybody, for taking a look at that. Okay, then the next item on the agenda is Carol Parker and I've seen this information. It's absolutely fabulous. I can't wait to see it again. So to talk about the depot registry process and all the amazing, and I mean amazing work that's gone into this that Carol's done on her own. Thank you very much. Lots and lots and lots of interesting research, the likes of which I would never be able to do. Anyway, so Carol's got a great presentation for that.
Yeah, and I want to preface it by just saying, the one thing we're not going to talk about here is the merits of adding the depot to the local registry, because that's a discussion that needs to take place in the public hearing, which is on December 5th. So if I don't answer your question on that, that's why. But to start off, do you want to put the slide up on your screen, the PowerPoint up?
You're talking to me, sorry. Yeah. Let me move this guy.
There it is.
There we are. Well, you're good at this.
Yeah, she is. So I think we could skip through this one because we're gonna talk about adding the Canby Depot, but we're not talking about the merits. So this is just sort of the context and what happened around that. Today, I'm going to talk just briefly, just a refresher on historic landmark basic information. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the research process and why I did it the way I did. And then I'm going to talk about some of the things I found out. Next slide. The questions on here, actually, some time ago, Nora Clark, who's the president of the Canby Historical Society, invited me to come and talk to the board about what I was doing and how they would need to, what they needed to know. And basically, I went to that meeting prepared to talk about, okay, this is where I'm going with the research. And this is what's going to happen once the application is submitted. This is the process you're going to have to follow, just so they were aware. Well, before I could even get out the first sentence, they started asking me these questions. What criteria? How does the National Register differ from the local register? And I thought, and the pages, and the one on the next page too. And so they, I thought, these are the questions that I should be using in any kind of presentation like this. The basic ones, because if the Canby Historical Society Board, which is not involved in historic preservation of properties anyway, has these questions, and probably most of the people in Canby have these kind of questions. So the criteria is there's 4 parts to it. The building has to be 50 years old. It has to retain historic integrity. It has to have historic significance, and we have to have owner approval. And then a little discussion about how does the National Register differ from the local register, and you also get to appreciate the view of Jennifer's house.
Staring right at the screen, I don't realize.
Yeah, and her house is on there because it's on a registry, a local register, but it's the county local register because her property is in unincorporated areas. So also people want to know what's on, what does Canby have designated now? And you can go to the next slide, Judy. And when I did this at Rotary, just sort of get stuff moving and making sure everybody was awake after eating their lunch, I gave them a multi-choice question, multi-choice question about historic properties that were designated in Canby. And they could have selected 20 or more, around 10, or 5 or less. And 2/3 of the room raised their hand at 20 or more. 1/3 of the room raised their hand at 10, about 10, and only one person raised their hand at 5 or less, and that was JD. And JD, her answer didn't count. So I think I'm sharing that with you because I think it's something to just be aware of. People have there's a real disconnect between reality and what's really protected. And one of these days, the city's going to have to face up to that. Somebody's going to want to come in and take down half of Grant Street and wipe out a bunch of historic buildings, and there's no protection on any of those buildings. Another question I got from anybody, especially who was living here in the 1970s and the 1980s, is, didn't the city do this once already? And the answer is sort of, kind of. In 1978, the council passed a resolution, and I'll tell you, I was so happy when I found the newspaper article in the file that said the city had done this in 1978. And then I actually went and I pulled the minutes from that particular city council meeting, and it was a resolution. And a resolution doesn't do anything other than it's a statement of support, probably doesn't do other things, but I had hopes that maybe I wouldn't have to do this project. So I did send a copy to our city attorney just to make sure. And yes, we have to go back to square one. We have to do it all over again. And so Nora and I talked about that, and we decided it was actually a good thing for a whole slew of reasons, nothing to do even with protection of the property. So you can go to the next slide. Ooh, wrong order. Oh no, this is the right slide. Thank you. I'm out of order. I was going to talk to you about this process I use for research. Some of you are probably aware of the fact that there's conflicting information out there about the depot, and in particular about its age and about, is it the original ONC depot? And so I decided to, for this particular project, I had to go to all the places that I would think that there would be information, and that included the Museum of the Oregon Territory, Oregon Historical Society. You can just read this. The University of Oregon Historic Newspaper Database was probably my most used resource, and it was invaluable. In cases of conflicting information, I had to make sure I double sourced and used primary sources whenever I could, whenever they were available, as opposed to secondary resources. And then the other thing was I had footnote. And so this is just a photo of, at the upper corner there, of the first page and the footnotes. Literally on most of the pages, the footnotes are, there's more footnotes than there are actual text. Because it's really important when you're dealing with controversial information or conflicting information that you leave a paper trail so that anybody can go walk behind you and find exactly what you found. And then there's just a picture here of one of the secondary sources I used, which is a book by Henry Bender on Southern Pacific Standard Design depots. So now we're going to the next slide.
Carol, I have a question. Can you give me an example of a primary source versus a secondary source?
Sure. The Philander Lee sales agreement with is a primary source. Newspaper articles are often primary source, and not all primary sources are created equal. Newspaper articles are probably not as good as, say, written documents. We've got lots of, my footnotes are correspondence between the city administrator and Myra Weston, who at the time was heading up the project to move the depot and rehab it. So those are kind of primary sources. Secondary source would be something like, we've got the history of Canby on our website, the city's website. That's a secondary source. It's taking information from primary sources and then compiling it into a history.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, now we're going to do a bit of time travel. It is 1869. We are all sitting right here, except we're in an apple orchard. And this spot is Philander Lee's, his property. And if you climb the nearest tree around you and look around, and it's daylight as opposed to right now, you look around in all directions, what you're going to see is orchards, fields, rows of trees. You're going to see dispersed a little bit in every direction, some homes with some outbuildings, and probably some livestock. And what you're not going to see is you're not going to see a church, you're not going to see a school, and you're not going to see any commercial buildings at all. This is just farmland. That's the only thing that's here. Okay, you can come out of the tree now. So the second thing I've got up there is a timeline of the Oregon and California Railroad, which then became the Southern Pacific Railroad. And it's important to know this because in 1869, as we were up in that tree, construction started in Portland. Now, what you should know about railroads in Oregon at this time is this is the beginning years of railroads. So the field of play is very chaotic. There's lots of players in there. It's very unregulated at this point in time. Costs a heck of a lot of money, a lot of risk involved. You've got to not only build the railroad, but you've got to buy the locomotives. Those have to be shipped. And so you got to pay for the shipping. It's really, really expensive. So it's financially extremely risky. At the same time that's happening, our financial system, our economic system in the country was also just a hotbed of risk. I mean, every 10 to 20 years, there was a panic, markets crashed, people lost everything they had. So it's just an interesting thing to think about. Put yourself back in the position of the owners and the leaders of the Oregon and California Railroad and the kind of decisions they were making. So the key players for Canby at that time were Ben Holiday. He is the head of the ONC. He is a successful business person. He is sort of a flim-flam guy. He'd probably con you if he could, but he's very successful. He made $1 million selling a stagecoach line to Wells Fargo. And he did that, seeing, I think, that the railroad was the new thing, and he could make another, who knows how many million railroad work in building a railroad. This is just the timeline of his particular, of that particular effort. As I said, there were many other initiatives going on around the state of Oregon. Philander Lee, of course, is one of the first Canby settlers. Not the first, but one of the first. And Joseph Knight moved to Canby in 1868. Let's see, so you can go to the next page. When I was doing the research, a couple of things just really made me step back and think, oh my gosh. In the popular history of Canby that you read in those secondary sources, the story of the railroad gives a lot of credit to Philander Lee. He sold the land. He worked with the surveyors. He had specs for this width of the street. But as I'm going through the file, I come across, and I'll pass this around, this. And I'm sorry, I was gonna bring you the original, I couldn't find it, so this is just a photo that I took of it that was in the presentation we did for Rotary. And it's not a complete image, it's just a partial image. What I find is a sales agreement between the ONC Railroad and Philander Lee. And it's important because he has stipulations in there, some of things like where the cattle crossing should be. It also stipulates that a depot should be built. Now, in all of the time that I have been studying Canby, I had never seen that before. I don't think I'd read that before. And just to sanity check myself, I asked Nora, I said, Nora, have you looked at that sales agreement between Philander Lee and the ONC Railroad? And she said, there's no sales agreement. I said, yeah, there is, Nora, there is. So I'm not the only one that was a little shocked. Go back in time, you're back in the orchard, it's 1869, you're the head of the ONC Railroad. This is just a bunch of farmland. Why are you going to build a depot here? In Aurora, they already have a hotel, they already have commercial structures. I think there's even some stuff in New Era, there's some commercial structures there as well. So why did you pick Canby? Is it a game changer? I don't know that it was a game changer, but I do think that maybe it tipped the scales, and that's why there is a site for the depot. In fact, he actually cited it, not exactly where the arch is today, but sort of where the arch is. He wanted it on the south side of the road, but what happened is it got built on the north side of the track. So anyway, it was really important, I think, that in the write-up that I did for the nomination, that I gave Philander Lee credit for something that I think was really incredibly important. And it's in a Myra Weston box. The original? Yeah, no, the original was given to, a copy of the original was with family and a family member who lived in the Dalles. And he gave it, his last name is Jenkins, he gave it to the depot, a copy of it. So, yeah. 1868, or 1868, a fellow by the name of Joseph Knight moves to Canby. Joseph Knight is 69 in that year. He still has children at home that are, children age, but he also has 6 adult sons, and they and their families have all sort of been moving across together, and they all come to Canby. In the history of, again, in the popular history of Canby, what you read is that when the ONC Railroad purchased Lee's land, they also purchased portions of the Sealy and Joslin DLCs, the donation land claims. And just so you know, this is the Molalla River, north to south. The Joslin land claim runs right through Baker Prairie Cemetery and goes all the way to the river. Just south of that, downstream or upstream, is the Sealy donation land. And the next donation land claim is Lorenzo Cross, and he's right, his Canby High School's on his donation land claim, so just right down the river. So if you're going to get across the river, and you're in the ONC Railroad, you got to go through Joseph Knight's land, no matter what. But he doesn't get any credit for being part of the deal. Those histories typically refer to Sealy's and the Joslins. Joslins were dead. They died a couple years before. The Sealy's had moved to Oregon City, actually to Kenema, in 1857. So they were long gone. So why do these histories leave the impression that they were even involved? I cannot explain that. Joseph Knight not only brought, as I said, his family and his 6 sons, but another important thing to understand is those 6 sons had incredible trade skills, and there's a backstory about that I don't have time to go into, but one was a carpenter, another was a mason, another was a blacksmith, another was a shoemaker, there was mill grinding, and there was grain milling and lumber milling. So they brought all of these skills to town. They were all in their 30s, 20s, 30s, 40s, and they had their families with them. And they're also just Energizer bunnies. These people have the highest work ethic, as I started reading about what they accomplished. And if you get back up in that tree in 1873 and you look around, especially if you look to the west, what you're going to see is it is completely transformed in a very short period of time. There's now a mercantile store across from the depot. There's another mercantile store down the street from that. There's a hotel under construction. There's a pharmacy. There's now homes on what is now First Avenue. And that happened in such an incredibly short period of time. And the builders for most of that were the Knights: William Knight, George Knight, Charles Knight, Adam Knight, Joseph Knight, just an incredible group of folks. And they didn't stop there. They really made a new home here, and most of them stayed here for a good portion of their lives. And that again is, I think, an undertold story about Canby, just how transformational that was, how quickly it happened, and how those key players were so critical. Holiday, Joseph Knight, and Philander Lee. I think that's it for that slide. Oh, and by the way, that really isn't Joseph Knight. That's Joseph Knight's son. Better looking and better picture. What can I say?
We'll just call him Junior.
Yeah,
Yeah, he was still here, making shoes way into like for another 50 years. He was here for a long time. Yeah. Did you know him or no? No.
That's how long I was using, that's how long Al Fish cotton shoes,
Oh, okay.
52 years.
So the really controversial, not controversial, but conflicting information about the depot and when it was built and who built it. The vendor book, which I mentioned before, Henry or Harry, I can't remember. His whole specialty in life, he's not a historian. He is one of those people that has a piece of history that becomes his mega hobby. And so he has written this entire book about Southern Pacific depots and the standard design. And so he points out that in his book, that the Canby Depot is a standard design combination, single story combination number 11, I think. Yeah, look at that picture. It is one of, number 11. It is one that is typically built in small towns like Canby. So the combination means you've got, the people, place, and you've got the warehouse space. So using 1891 as a starting point, I went back into the Oregon City Enterprise online in the University of Oregon database. And I actually started back in 1890. And this is not everything I found. This is just a portion, but there's duplicates of all of these. These get repeated and repeated and repeated. And the first one you can't read, but it basically is a very typical rant that I saw week after week in the Oregon City Enterprise that Canby needs a depot building. The people of this place think the Southern Pacific Railway is not treating them right by not giving them a better depot facility. And one of the rants referred to it as nothing better than a chicken coop. That was this all starts about 1890. And one of them describes it as a 10 by 12 small house. And if you think back to that timeline, Southern Pacific had taken over by then. The ONC had gone belly up twice by then, and when the Southern Pacific had to pick up pieces. And when they did, they actually began to do a lot of work. They took out the narrow gauge track, they put in standard gauge, they upgraded facilities, and I think people in Canby were saying, why not us? Why aren't you coming here? And I think that was driving a lot of that. Interestingly, the article on 1030 is followed by one, the second one is November 6th. So this is a weekly newspaper, and every week they have sort of an inside page that's news from around the county. There are lots and lots of newspapers in Oregon City in this period of time, but this happened to be the one that made sure that they got news from around the county. And it says, the railroad depot, a small 8 by 12 house, was blown down last night, leaving us without any depot facilities. Small as the house was, it is still better than none. So,
Sorry.
my question is, at the time was there really a windstorm? Yeah. So skeptical. And so I went out and I searched Salem newspapers and the Portland newspapers in that same period of time, couldn't find any reference to a windstorm. I think somebody hooked up. Yeah, a couple of oxen or a couple mules, tied a chain to the building and pulled it down. And maybe it was, and it could have been a night just like tonight, you know, there was wind. You could say it was wind, yeah. But the depot was gone. So fast forward to January 1st, 1892, the new depot erected at Canby is the best one between Salem and Portland, which shows that the railway recognizes the place as one of future importance. Oh, yeah.
Less than 2 months.
Well, when we went to the Oregon Historical Society, they have 300 cubic feet of Southern Pacific records. And in those records are 2 boxes of ONC records, and there's also a box of the blueprints. They had crews stationed in Corvallis. So what they would do, there was actually like a dormitory. There was a dormitory designated for Chinese workers and a dormitory designated for white workers, two of them in Corvallis. And methinks what they did was they would just put people, you know, they put them on a train. These are standard design depots, so they probably have a couple of them in the back room where they just pull out all the lumber that they need and put it in there, and then they just ship it up. So yeah.
I know you know how slow it is now getting things. It just seems like, I mean, it's less than 2 months. It's
Oh, yeah, it was
literally
fast.
like 8 weeks.
Yeah, yeah.
It's crazy.
The last one is just, the painters had left, by, January 29, 1802. The depot painters have departed to paint the depot in Springfield.
I
So,
don't know, but it's sitting in the sand mixture.
yeah. So anyway, yes, I bet it was, it's stuff mixed with the sand mixture, so,
That was the most surprising thing we found was sand mixed in with paint.
yeah. What do they know? What can I say? So anybody have any questions? Yeah.
Yeah. One of the slides there had, I think, 4 different pictures of places that have already been on the
Oh, yeah.
historical sites. Which ones are they?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's real hard to read. Sorry about that. Pioneer Chapel.
I can see it, all I did was see the church.
Yeah, the Pioneer Chapel, the Bear House, the Map House, the Night House, and the Holly Street City Hall.
Yeah, I couldn't hear you.
That's okay. Let me just hand this to you. It's right there in the middle. You can have it. Anybody else have any questions? That was really fun.
I've got 3 questions.
Yeah.
I see you sound nice.
But one of the really fun things was when we were at the Oregon Historical Society, and Judy was with me and Nora was with me. We were like, remember when the man got killed in the South Park Blocks, an older gentleman was getting on a bus stop? Well, we were there like about 2 weeks after that. So I had called the Canby Historical, or the Oregon Historical Society and said, hey, how bad is it? And is it safe? So we kind of went as a group. And it was actually, there was nothing.
It was a ghost town.
There was no camping, there was nobody around. The last time.
To be a chauffeur.
You could park anywhere.
You're right there.
Yeah, it was great. And so, as I was going through the ONC records, investors, well, from the get-go, the investors have generally been German. And so as I'm looking through the official records that the corporation would put out, you know, the financial records, what did we accomplish this year? It's all in German. So which was so fun to see that. And that continued because the German investors, once, what's his name? Holiday went belly up, the 1873 crashed it right now. Once he went belly up, those investors were still there. And they still have those bonds, and they wanted their money. And so they hired a guy named Henry Ballard. I don't know if it's Billard or Ballard. And he became the manager, and he was German. He had been a German immigrant, so they knew him, and I think they felt comfortable with probably talk the same language. And so he took it over until it went bankrupt again in 18, whatever the next bankruptcy was.
I got a
Well, a comment and a question. I researched it because when FOB held their Oktoberfest this year in Wake Park, I looked it up, and 11.3% of census people giving information to the census last time identified their heritage as German in Canby.
Oh, yeah, that's totally, there's a huge German out there.
And then the other question with Knight's sons and each of them, that really was extraordinary. It's like build a city with your children.
They've done it before.
But the one working with lumber, or my question in those days is, did they kiln dry their wood before they nailed it together?
I have no clue.
You know,
Not that I know.
because I know today, one of the things that, especially with all the blowdowns and that sort of thing, that the couple local mills process people's lumber. The question then is how do you get it kiln dry? Because I'm learning this as a hobby woodmaker, that if you don't, then, and you put something together, then as it dries out, it moves around. But I don't know if they had the time in those days to go through that process.
It's anything I earlier, but doing cabins and things like that, it's already out districts and right. But they would have had the cedar planks and shingles to kind of fill in the spaces and then you would expand the contract. So it's not early, but they may have started at this point.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
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 Large.
I would look up the history of Yoder Mill.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need a field trip to the Yoder Mill.
Because I know that it was in high gear in the early 1900s. Yoder
Oh,
Mill.
yeah.
So it could be that they took logs there and that may have been the processing area. I'm not sure. I don't know enough history about it to know. Judy, do you know when the Yoder Mill started up?
No, I know it was in the 1800s. Why 1890 sticks in my mind, but I don't know why.
And that's just a side thing. I mean, it'd be interesting to look into it. I'm sure there's I'm sure actually that newspaper database, I'm sure I can get lost in that for
I
hours.
know.
And I bet if you search Yoder Mill in there, I bet you'll get a lot.
Yeah. Oh, I did, I've seen
I'll
them.
take a look, I'll take a look.
Yeah.
But Yoder Mill, though, remember in the 1870s when the Knights were here building like crazy, that Yoder Mill would not have been there. Yeah. I don't think, maybe it was,
Well,
1870, yeah.
Something I just remembered from the Foxfire book is that they would build, and of course, this is backing up legends. They would actually build houses, or a building that they would use to try to.
So I had a question, Carol. I can't remember where I heard this, but there was a rumor or something that this was like the oldest depot on the West Coast, but that's not really proven. Is that right?
It's not only not proven, we know it was torn down, the original depot was, and this,
Oh, okay.
yeah, it would have been, if it was the 1871 depot, it would have been the oldest, but it's not the oldest.
Okay.
This one, I can find other Southern Pacific depots that still exist that are older than this in Oregon, or other depots.
Older, but not better.
And there's a twin to this on Antique Power.
Yes, and there's a twin to it also in Lebanon.
Yoder Mill was built in 1889.
Oh, I was close.
Sure. Rebuilt, burned down and rebuilt a total of 3 times. So that would be about the right time for it.
For this one, yeah. Although they would have had their own lumber. They would have brought it up from Corvallis,
Yeah.
probably. Because it was like it was like an
What
IKEA
would they have
thing.
had? Yeah, what would they have the stuff, the sawmill, the saw, like.
That's a really good question. I'll have to go back and look at the vendor book and see what he says. Yeah.
I wonder if they have a sign out there, because why would I know that? I drive by it fairly regularly. It's so cool to drive by. and just on my way back and forth, but maybe they have a sign out. Maybe that's why I had some idea. Anyway, that's cool.
You've been in the store, it's really neat in there.
Yeah, yeah.
I've never been.
And that was like 1910 or 1914, they built that, yeah, it's really cool inside, it feels very.
Yeah, everybody should take a little trip to Yoder.
When was the Canby Depot moved to the spot?
It was moved in 1883. And in fact, there's a picture of it. I think one of the photos in here is of it in its sort of moving stage, or maybe that one didn't make it in here. But yeah, 1883. 1983. Sorry. Yeah. I'm not
We
being
watched it, we watched it move.
Everybody got out of
Sure.
school, and it was a holiday.
It was so cool to see the pictures of people lining
Kids
the
were lining the
streets. And there it is,
streets.
hitting the trees as it's going past. Oh, yeah, this is great.
Yeah.
Great, and it looked awesome.
And another tie into Yoder is the big orange engine that runs the sawmill at Brooks at Antique Powerland. Once ran things at Yoder.
Ah,
Cool.
And my cousin worked in Yoder, and I said, boy, your power bills must be enormous. He said, we use steam. I said, you gotta be kidding. I said, you going to see the engine? Sure.
I think right up here. Yeah, that was fun.
That was really something.
Which, where the Lego place is now?
No, it was where the parking lot is behind the Lego place on the north side of the depot, or the north side of the railroad tracks. So you know where Matthews World is? Just right across the street from Matthews World.
Incidentally, the building that the Lego land is in was built as a tribute to Buchanan Cellars.
It looks perfect for that. It does. It's really good.
Thank you, Carol. This has just been the most interesting 20 minutes of my life. I want this all the time. This is tremendous.
Thank you very much, Carol, for that and for all the work that you put into that. So I know when Carol presented this at the Rotary meeting a while back, they really enjoyed it as well. And I think learned a lot, even though they're all Canbians from long ago. So anyway, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sometime I'll come back if you want and I'll tell you the
Oh, you're
backstory
welcome.
on the
You're welcome there
nights.
anytime.
Okay,
Bye.
awesome.
All right, bye.
All right.
And so it's perfect timing too, since, you know, we've got this public hearing coming up. So now we've got a lot of the background about, you know, the value and the importance of this thing. So awesome. All right, so the only other thing I had on the agenda was just to touch base on future dates. So again, December 5th, put that on your calendar. You'll see some email from me very soon. But then in January, we typically cancel our January meeting. I don't know, it's just sort of a tradition, you know, we've gotten through the holidays and take a little break for the beginning of January. So that's still the plan. Unless something comes up or any of you have something you think we need to meet about, again, just kind of keep that in the back of your minds that typically we do not meet in January. So anything else, anybody?
Oh, just to say that Pitch Peppers will be at the Let Up the Night
Oh, tremendous.
on, what is that, December 2nd?
Yes.
We'll be there.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Thank you. And usually someone records that and I get to see it on Facebook or something. So somebody record it. Somebody will. All right, that's great. Okay, everyone.
Judy, the one other thing that I've got to add is we had the dedication of the arch. And I was impressed by the text and the language on the plaques, giving the history of the area. It's just superb curation of the history. And in January, because the weather wasn't bad enough last week, that in January is going to be the dedication of the time capsule. So
Good job, Judy.
Excellent. And to you and to the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde who gave us the language for the one that, you know, mentions the indigenous population in history. So yep, good group effort. Thank you for your compliment. All right, everyone, stay safe out there. Bundle up, come down south. All right. Talk to you later. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tyler.
Thank you.
Don't make time.
Bye.
Look at the blacks, I didn't see the pictures.